I really believe that, and it's so important that we pass the big, beautiful bill, because that's going to be, and I really think we're helped a lot by the tariff situation that's going on, which is a good situation, not a bad. It's great. It's going to be legendary. You watch.
Trump administration has halted work on a huge offshore wind project just off the coast of Connecticut.
That this is such a dumb decision, it's going to get fixed.
Frustration and more than a little bewilderment was the mood of the governor as he responded to the Trump administration's decision to halt work on the Revolution wind farm.
President Trump promised to cut America's electricity and energy prices in half. New data, however, shows prices are actually rising more than twice as fast as inflation.
Trump.
It was meant to be the future. A vast offshore wind farm rising just beyond Rhode Island's coast, built to power hundreds of thousands of homes across New England. Revolution Wind was already 80% complete, its turbines poised to capture ocean winds and deliver clean, affordable electricity. Then, with a stroke of a pen, it all collapsed. The project was cancelled just before it could connect to the grid, leaving steel towers standing idle like monuments to a broken promise. More than 500 workers suddenly found themselves without jobs. Families who had placed their hopes in stable, renewable energy faced the same old dependence on fossil fuels and rising bills. What was supposed to be a symbol of progress has become a warning sign, proof that even in regions desperate for clean energy, political uncertainty can erase years of investment overnight. If America cannot even finish a nearly completed wind farm, what does that say about its ability to lead in the next energy race? The cancellation was not an isolated event, but the beginning of something larger. Across the United States, clean energy projects are being shelved, delayed, or abandoned altogether. Not because of technical failures, but because of erratic and short-sighted policy choices. What began with one offshore project in New England has grown into a nationwide setback, reshaping the country's energy future. In 2025 alone, more than $14 billion in renewable investments were scrapped or pushed into indefinite limbo, taking more than 10,000 jobs with them. The first quarter accounted for $8 billion in losses, with April alone adding another $4.5 billion to the tally. These numbers are not just figures on a spreadsheet. They represent factories that never opened, construction sites that went silent, and communities left waiting for opportunities that never came. Even where projects technically remain on paper, the supply chain itself has been breaking under relentless strain. For 54 consecutive months, the United States has faced shortages of critical electrical equipment, from transformers to circuit breakers, making it nearly impossible for new renewable projects to connect to the grid. In New England, utilities now openly warn of rolling blackouts during peak winter demand, a scenario once unimaginable in one of America's most advanced regions. And the issue is not confined to renewables. From nuclear operators to pipeline companies, private businesses increasingly describe the federal government as an unreliable partner, one that tears up contracts as easily as it signs them. The unsettling question reverberating through corporate boardrooms is simple. If America cannot be trusted to honor its own commitments, who will risk billions to build its next generation of power infrastructure if supply shortages were one wound, terrorists became the salt rubbed into it? Policies intended to protect American industry have instead strangled renewable growth, turning projects into financial tightropes. Unlike oil and gas, where nearly 90% of supply is domestic, renewable energy depends heavily on imports. In solar, less than half the supply chain originates in the United States, leaving the sector highly vulnerable to tariff hikes. The timing could hardly be worse. With artificial intelligence data centers and cryptocurrency mining operations driving electricity demand higher than forecast, Washington's tariff war has slowed wind and solar expansion to a crawl. The paradox is glaring. America is consuming more power than ever while cutting itself off from the very sources that could stabilize the grid. And the damage extends beyond energy. Tariffs have rippled through the broader economy, inflating vehicle and equipment costs by as much as 15% and feeding overall inflation. Even household tools have been affected. Stanley Black & Decker reported $800 million in tariff-related costs in just the first half of 2025, costs certain to be passed on to consumers. For industries already weakened by shortages, these tariffs feel less like protection and more like suffocation. With no clear resolution in sight, uncertainty itself may now be the greatest threat to America's energy and economic future. Yet, just as tariffs squeeze the system, demand for electricity accelerates. The contradiction could not be sharper. At the very moment the country most needs clean, reliable power, its own policies are tightening the noose. Revolution Wind once promised electricity at just 9.8 cents per kilowatt hour, cheaper than the regional average and a lifeline for households bracing against rising costs. That promise has now vanished. Instead of stabilizing bills, the cancellation leaves New England exposed to volatile fuel markets and higher rates. The state's own Department of Energy and Environmental Protection has already issued a warning. Without new renewable capacity, the region faces worsening price instability and potential shortages. What was supposed to be the dawn of a new energy era has turned into a cautionary tale. Projects once envisioned as beacons of progress now stand as reminders of how quickly ambition can unravel when politics trumps planning. America's energy future is not merely about turbines or solar panels. It is about credibility, stability, and the willingness to commit to long-term goals. If that commitment falters, so too does the chance of leading the next energy revolution. By 2028, electricity costs could rise by $500 million annually, translating into a 5 to 7% increase on household utility bills. For families already pressed by inflation, even modest jumps in energy costs can cascade into painful choices about budgets, savings, and daily expenses. The pressure is not confined to households. For businesses, the situation is just as dire. Without the relief of cheaper renewable energy, production costs continue to climb year after year. Manufacturers must either absorb the blow or pass it along to consumers, fueling the very inflation policymakers claim to be fighting. The result is a double bind. Households face higher bills both at home and at the checkout line, while companies struggle to remain competitive under mounting expenses. What was meant to be a story of affordable clean power has instead become one of shrinking supply, rising costs, and missed opportunities. A reminder that in energy, delay is itself a form of decline. As if energy paralysis were not enough, America's finances are unraveling in parallel. The same government that struggles to deliver clean power is now running deficits at levels many analysts call unsustainable. In August alone, the federal deficit surged to $345 billion, well above projections. By the end of the year, the shortfall reached a staggering $1.9 trillion, the largest in U.S. history, while interest payments on the national debt soared to $1.1 trillion, another record. These are not simply abstract numbers on a ledger. Every dollar spent on interest is a dollar not invested in infrastructure, innovation, or renewable energy. With projects already canceled, the fiscal squeeze raises a deeper question. Even if Washington wanted to pivot, does it still have the financial room to act? The picture that emerges is of a nation trapped in a double bind, needing affordable power to fuel growth while its budget bleeds like a leaking barrel, leaving long-term planning less about ambition and more about survival. While Washington wrestles with paralysis, Ottawa has been quietly rewriting the script. What looks like crisis for the United States has become opportunity for Canada, a neighbor long viewed as a junior partner in North America's economy. Since what Canadian officials now call Liberation Day, the moment tariffs and energy uncertainty began pushing investment north, the Canadian dollar has strengthened by more than 3% against the US dollar, outpacing 16 other major global currencies. This is not a market quirk. It reflects a deeper confidence that Canada, not the United States, may now represent a safer long-term bet. Forecasts for 2026 and 2027 point to steady or even accelerating Canadian growth. A feat not seen since the mid-1990s as Ottawa is preparing to redirect as much as $38.4 billion in oil and LNG exports originally destined for the U.S. toward European and Asian markets desperate for stable suppliers. For allies rattled by America's volatility, Canada suddenly appears as a reliable partner willing to step into the breach. At home, Prime Minister Mark Carney has framed the moment as a turning point, dismantling long-standing internal trade barriers that for decades slowed the flow of goods across provinces. His government argues Canada could unlock an additional $200 to $250 billion in GDP simply by improving domestic market efficiency. In other words, Canada is not just benefiting from America's missteps. It is actively re-engineering its economy to capture strategic advantages that could endure for a generation. The message is clear. When one superpower stumbles, even a smaller neighbor can use the opening to reposition itself on the global stage. Side by side on the same continent, the United States and Canada are now charting paths that could not be more different. Washington, once seen as the anchor of stability, is increasingly regarded as an unreliable partner, canceling contracts, erecting terror walls, and undermining the very trust that made it the world's preferred ally. Each reversal chips away at the credibility that underpinned America's economic dominance for decades. Ottawa, by contrast, has positioned itself as a quiet beneficiary. Capital that once flowed automatically into U.S. projects is being redirected northward, particularly in clean energy and advanced manufacturing. Investors who might once have viewed Canada as a secondary option now see it as a safer harbor, where policy aligns more predictably with long-term commitments. The contrast could not be sharper. America shoulders ballooning deficits, rolling energy crises, and rising uncertainty, while Canada carefully accumulates strategic advantages, turning reliability itself into its most powerful currency. Though this shift is unfolding without fanfare, its consequences are profound. The balance of power in North America is beginning to tilt, not through dramatic declarations, but through the steady, silent movement of money, technology, and trust. In geopolitics, momentum often changes quietly before it becomes obvious. Today, that quiet shift seems to be happening just across America's northern border. That a single wind project scrap may look like a local setback, but in truth, it reflects something far larger: the erosion of America's position in the global energy race. By canceling Revolution Wind, Washington surrendered not just clean electricity, but also the chance to lower costs precisely at a moment when demand from AI data centers and digital infrastructure is exploding. Meanwhile, global markets are adjusting their bets. Canada is no longer seen as the understudy, but as a rising pillar ready to anchor investment and trade when the United States hesitates. Each canceled project, each ballooning deficit, reinforces a perception that America is drifting while its neighbor seizes momentum. The warning could not be clearer. If the U.S. continues dismantling clean energy initiatives while bleeding billions through runaway deficits, its role as the world's economic leader will not vanish overnight.